I wanted to start off with, not the internet here, but let's see if I can get off of this, with a Calvin Hobbes cartoon, one of my favorites. This one says, do you have an idea for your project yet? This is on creativity. No, I'm waiting for inspiration. You can't just turn on creativity like a faucet. You have to be in the right mood. What mood is that? Last minute panic, right? I think all of us have kind of been in this. In fact, even Leonard Bernstein had a great quote that said, to achieve greatness, you need two things. You need a plan, and you need not quite enough time. And I think that's exactly how creativity can work with all of us. We really need to have these deadlines, these festivals, different reasons to be creative. We need to have a plan, and we need to have that motivation to get us through the plan. So, maybe some of you saw this Newsweek article a couple of years back. I think this is really important, called The Creativity Crisis. And in here it says, we are becoming less verbally or emotionally expressive or sensitive and less empathetic. Less responsive in a kinesthetic and auditory way, less humorous, less imaginative, less able to visualize ideas, less able to see things from different angles, less unconventional, less able to connect seemingly irrelevant things together, less able to synthesize information, and less able to fantasize or be future-oriented. That's a lot of lessons, right? And there's actually data to back this up. One of the most important data that they're using to back these theories up is what's called the Torrance test. Maybe some of you guys have taken this, especially the kids in here. In the last 30 or 40 years, they've given this Torrance test to hundreds of thousands of school-aged children. And doing things like what you see at the very top there, where you get a shape, and the students have to figure out, okay, only using circles, what can you draw? They have evaluators that take a look at it and say, oh, that's really creative. They did a little Mickey Mouse out of just circles. Oh, this student just did a chain. You know, if you just did a donut, you probably would get a low score on your creativity with using circles, right? How creative can you do when you combine different shapes? As you can see here, can you make a king, or do you just do a kind of traditional like face out of those shapes? What about if you get two random kind of figures like you see in the complete thing, a U and then a little circle? What could you do just by using that to complete it? They give you things like random associates tests, where you have these words like cream and skate and water. And by using another word, you actually, one word can actually complete all three. You guys think of the word that would complete cream, skate, and water?
Ice.
Ice. Ice cream, ice skate, ice water. What about opera, pan, and dish? So, there you go, yeah. John would be low on that, the avocado. That probably would get a low score. Or maybe extra creative, I don't know, maybe you would get a high score for that. What about force, line, and mail? That's what we're talking about. Air force, airline, airmail. And then other things like how many different uses can you come up with a paperclip. So this is the Torrance test that's been given since the 1970s. 4 different categories: fluency, originality, flexibility, and elaboration. Well, an interesting thing's been happening in the last 20 years. You can see it with these graphs. You can see kind of a spike in about 1990 or so. And you can see in those 4 categories how these scores are going down with students in the last 20 years. This is especially interesting because IQ scores are going up. There's something called the Flynn effect, which says to the average of about 15 to 20 IQ points each generation raises in IQ over the previous generation. So I'm curious from this group here, if you can figure out why would you figure that kids are getting smarter, but they're getting less creative? Any ideas? Yeah, what would you say?
I feel like it's because we've become so test-oriented and getting the right idea instead of how many ideas and how varied your ideas can be.
I think anybody in the public education system, I've given this workshop in several places, and people that are actually teaching public school echo that to the max, saying we have so much pressure to, you know, our pay depends on this, other types of funding on kids getting great test scores, and we don't have time to do any of this other creative stuff. Other reasons?
Rudolf Steiner talks about how technology only goes into the second part of the brain. The third part of the brain is the imagination. And if you stay with technology and media, they never get to that point.
Great point. These are the 2 areas that this article brings up. It says, what's driving the drop? According to Newsweek, technology and education are particularly nefarious culprits. At home, kids are spending more and more time watching television, playing video games, and in school, our educational system is evaporating creative juices. Neither of these criticisms, is particularly new, but they are informative within the context of the creativity discussion. So again, preaching to the choir, you all value creativity or you wouldn't be here. What I'd like to do today is to have us kind of think about the importance of what we do with creative work and how we can achieve that even from the youngest students, and many of you are teachers, but also each of you, how you can get into a creative mode in a regular way each day. So, a great quote here, why is this important? Creativity is just connecting things. When you ask creative people how they did something, they feel a little guilty because they really didn't do it. They just saw something. It seemed obvious to them after a while. That's because they were able to connect experiences they've had and synthesize new things. And the reason they were able to do that was because they had more experiences or they thought about more experiences than other people. Unfortunately, that's too rare a commodity. A lot of people in our industry have not had very diverse experiences, so they don't have a lot of dots to connect, and they end up with a very linear solution without a broad perspective on the problem. The broader ones was understanding of the human experience that a design we will have. You would expect that to be a musician or an artist, but regardless whether you go into music or you go into industry, computers, whatever, there's a value. We need creative people in the world. And so this is why what we do in this room is so important. Even if some of you kids go off and do other things, we need you to be creative in your professions as well. Why is creativity so important for pianists specifically? Well, I think John mentioned this a little bit. He's talked about making theory less theoretical, right? Now instead of just saying, okay, I've got to learn my C major scale, okay, now I've got to play my arpeggios, now you actually see the value and the reasons for it. It becomes practical. It's not just something you do for a worksheet or to do for your third theory exam for the festival or whatever. You start getting develop critical thinking, problem-solving skills. I think all improvisation is problem-solving. You set yourself up with a little scenario, you get your materials, and you've got to work out a solution. Composition is definitely that way, right? So when you start writing a piece, you definitely kind of set yourself up with the materials, and you've got to find a way out of this maze that you create. You get a new perspective on the creation of the repertoire that you perform. Now all of a sudden Mozart means something a little different to you. I love my students in composing because they start thinking of these composers as colleagues rather than these demigods that they have to kind of bow down and worship. I have students that say, Mozart could have had a better effect if he had maybe used an F sharp here. I just love when now students are starting to think that they're on the same level as these composers. They start seeing them as colleagues. They develop a new way of complementing other musical experiences. Now all of a sudden their interactions become a lot more holistic because of the creative processes they're using. Not only just in music, but they look at the world in different ways. And then finally, maybe most important, building self-esteem and confidence in their ideas. I, as a 10 or 11-year-old boy, some of the boys in this room know this is the case, it's not exactly the coolest thing to be a piano player at your school when you're in 5th or 6th grade, especially as a boy. But when you're starting to jam, improvise, maybe start to be that kid that can play, their own version of a pop song or something like that, all of a sudden you get a little bit of self-esteem. You start becoming that kid. And for me, right around that time is when I started to get really interested in Henry Mancini, Pink Panther, Baby Elf Rock, all that kind of stuff, playing blues scales. My friends thought that was the coolest thing in the world. And I wasn't playing Clementi for them, right? I was kind of jamming for my friends. And so that really helps, I think. So as teachers, what do we mean? I like to think about this creativity as the acronym CAT. I think we need to create a creative climate in our piano lessons. I think we need to have creative attitudes. And then we also need to encourage creative thinking.